Alright, morning everyone. So last week I read this book by Syeda Warsi, Muslims Don't Matter. Actually one that caught my attention a few times in bookshops, but then you know how bookshops are. You walk in to buy one thing and you see 5 or 6 other books and you buy them instead. This was really good, and it's one of those books where when you've got an idea of something, you suspect it to be the case. You pretty much know it's the case. But you don't have anybody with the data or the evidence, anecdotal evidence, experiential evidence, whatever. You don't have it. You haven't actually done the job of going through and collecting it. This book put together all the data for me, and it's very well written as well. Quite surprising, because there are other things you think this is definitely the case, but you don't realize how widespread it is, or how deep the roots are, or how far back it goes, which is the case with this. Now, if you're a GB News or a Talk TV or even a Telegraph or a Daily Mail, certainly a Daily Mail fan, you probably won't like this review. So warnings made. Yeah, Muslims don't matter. What does that mean? Basically that you're fair game. If you're Muslim, and with the last few Home Secretaries, the Conservative Home Secretaries that was, you're fair game. In fact, you should be targeted more than anybody else. Are there reasons behind that other than just straight racism? Yeah, probably. When you read the book, it becomes clear that there's always been straight racism. This is another book I'm going to review soon as well. It's The Invisible Doctrine, which calls upon that straight racism thing as well. But basically, you know, if you are Muslim, you are the target of hate, lies, racist propaganda, scapegoating, and more so now if you're Pakistani, because it's obviously a far-right racist thing, which is embraced a hell of a lot by India as well. In fact, one of the statistics in this book that came up, and this book was updated in 2025. Look at that, my camera's just gone mad. Hope you can still see me, I don't know. The book was updated in 2025. 87 or 86% of all online anti-Muslim hatred, racism directed at Muslims, and particularly Pakistanis, comes from 3 countries. I'm messing with my camera angle here. Comes from 3 countries: the US, America, and India. Now, one of the major drivers of anti-Muslim hatred and Pakistani hatred is you can't do it to Jews anymore. You know, that just after the Second World War, that was unacceptable. And let's not forget anti-Semitism. Where did that come from? Europe. That's why they're all fleeing Europe. There were pogroms in Europe. There were rules in England centuries ago about expelling all the Jews, which raises the topical question of why is the UK, regardless of whatever happens, apart from being a weak country that's really America's lapdog, why is it pandering so much to Israel? You know, we have the Conservative Friends of Israel, we have the Labour Friends of Israel. You don't have friends of any other country. There are ex-Israeli ministers in our government running our TV shows, writing articles in the Telegraph, of course. You know, the Telegraph is just propaganda sheet for the Tories. Even when they've been convicted of crimes, every sort of crime. Syeda starts the book off by recalling the plight of Jews in World War II in Europe, who sewed their diamonds into their coats in case they had to run from the country they were in. And there are cases in this book within the last 5 years, further back actually, but more so than the 5 years, where Pakistanis have upped and left, Muslims have upped and left, because the country, the UK, is no longer really safe for them. Of course, I said the UK, India, and America. It mainly concentrates on America, but primarily the UK, because you know, America is where a lot of the power behind that whole anti-Muslim hate comes from. You know, war on terror and all that shit, mainly driven by Zionism. You know, Netanyahu went and told America, Iraq has weapons of mass destruction. We must invade. How many thousands of American lives did that cost? How many millions of Arab lives has that cost? And that exerts a big influence on American politics and foreign policy. Foreign policy in America is basically Israeli foreign policy, really. You know, the student became the teacher, so to speak. But unlike the Frankenstein monster, they created a monster and it took over. And then you've got a lot of things like the Henry Jackson Foundation, racist, ethnic cleansing, Zionist organization that will never tell you it's Zionist, will never tell you where its money comes from, because to ask think tanks, propaganda tanks, who funds them is like, oh, you can't ask that because that would be biased. How? You know, that's like say to the victim of a murder, well, who, or a witness to a murder, well, who murdered them? Oh, I can't tell you because that would bias the investigation. Right. Talking about inquiries, so let's get back to the book. One of the biggest things, people like Elon Musk love bringing up, and he's a champion. He loves Tommy Robinson. He loves bringing up this whole grooming gang thing. The grooming gangs that were in is it Rochdale now? I forget the name. I do apologise. They were first investigated back in 2007. Loads of arrests have been made, but then you get these morons who come up and say, oh look, this is an unpunished crime that they tried to hide from you. No, there was an inquiry, everybody knew about it and arrests were made. But you've got to dig up the dirt if you want to target hate against someone. People like Elon Musk, not a politician, although really he's an oligarch, so he pretty much runs the show because we have become an oligarchy. The guy was sitting next to Trump for how long? If you don't believe me, if you think I'm over exaggerating here. And Tommy Robinson here, he was funded by basically a whole bunch of Zionist organisations to the tune of about $8,000 a month. When he goes to protest for Britain, he likes to wrap himself in an Israeli flag. Are we also the United States or the lapdog or Israel minor now? He thinks so, but that's because they're the ones who pay him. One of their major exports is, well, racism basically, racism and extremism. At the moment, let's get topical. Everyone's being asked to condemn, what was that, Bobby Villain, for saying death to the IDF. Have we ever, in the many decades it's been occurring, against a backdrop of mass murder and massacres, been asked to condemn any of these Israelis who march through Jerusalem, attacking people, screaming, death to Arabs, may your villages burn? That's been going on for decades. But we mustn't condemn them. Right? But you must condemn Bob Dylan. Fucking musician, for God's sake. Did we condemn the Sex Pistols? Was everybody asked to condemn the Sex Pistols when they sang God Save the Queen and the fascist regime? No, because she's not a Pakistani Muslimist terrorizer. You fucking morons. Anyway, so early morning, getting back to the book. So going back to this whole grooming nonsense, right? There was a study that politicians love to band around that showed, how many, and people like Suella Braverman have said this, Muslim, particularly Pakistani, men had committed rapes against white girls. They have to be innocent white girls. Never mind, and this is in the book as well, never mind all the Asian victims of child sexual abuse who are ignored. They don't matter, they're not white. So, it sounds like I'm making this shit up, but it's actually all in here. That's how bad it is. You wouldn't believe, well, you probably would believe it if you've had your eyes open. You know what's going on in Israel, in places like Kashmir, and places like the House of Lords and the House of Commons in British politics, and Talk TV. Was it Talk TV? Over 2 years, 17,000 negative mentions of Muslims and Pakistanis. Over 2 years. They basically don't tell the news. They just say, you got to hate these Pakistanis, you got to hate these Muslims, and isn't it terrible that somebody cast a horrible look at Israel while they were burning a maternity ward down? So, and there was the people on, I think it was Talk TV, who said this is how Nazis come to power, because Bob Dylan said death to the IDF. He did say death to Israelis, but it's okay to shout death to Arabs for decades and decades. He said death to the IDF, who prance around on social media after snipering children in front of their mothers and vice versa in the dead people's underwear laughing. They're wonderful. They're the most moral army in the world. Anyway, so back to the book. It all ties in so much to current topical things that it's hard to stay on track. It's hard to do it chapter by chapter. So one of the things mentioned in here, let's get back to child grooming. So the study that the governments love to band around basically looked at about 600,000 cases of reported child uh, sexual abuse of children, of minors, and then out of there picked out 180 that had been committed by Asians, published it like these are the only attacks that happen. They're after our children. They are, Of the people who got prosecuted, by the way, the leader of the gang wasn't even Pakistani, and he wasn't even Muslim. I think he was a Sikh guy, right? So it was just Asians. But let's look at the actual statistics, because you probably want to hear these statistics elsewhere. Because right now, there's a lot of noise being made about an inquiry has been, a public inquiry into grooming gangs is taking place. Won't make a difference. It's just there to keep you distracted, to make it look like the government gives a damn. They don't. It's not the first inquiry. There have been 2 or 3 others at the cost to the taxpayer of tens of millions of pounds. And here are the findings of the last 2. It may even be 3, but all the findings correspond. And this is why, when the inquiries were done, they were buried. And it took 7 years of campaigning to get Home Secretaries, people like Suella Braverman, Priti Patel, and all the other racists, right? To get them to actually publish these. They, human rights groups, charity organizations, they had to campaign for years to get these results made public by the government. Here are the results. Of all prosecuted sexual abuse cases of minors in the UK, 86% consistently are committed by white people. The majority of whom are men, some women. Not Muslims, not Pakistanis, who want to destroy us because of our freedoms. No, white people. Now, white people make up 81% of the UK population. So if it was just, based on how much of the population they make up, they should commit that many crimes. No, they're overrepresented. Asians, and that includes Indians, Pakistanis, people from China, Japan, all of that, Malaysia, they make up 6% of the people prosecuted for crimes, sexual crimes against minors. Of the actual population, they are 9%, so they're underrepresented. Africans, Caribbeans, black people, they make up 4% of the people who are prosecuted for sexual offences against children, and they make up 4% of the population as well, so they're the only ones where those two line up. Now take that along with the fact that studies consistently show that you're far more likely to be convicted of any crime if you're black. You're more likely to be convicted of any crime if you're Asian. You're less likely to be convicted of any crime than another person who wasn't white if you're white. So probably, if your colour of skin did not make any difference to how likely you were to be convicted of a crime, about 95% maybe of all the crimes would be convicted by, of all the prosecutions against, prosecutions of people for sexual abuse against minors would be white, yeah? Because there's probably there's definitely more of them doing it who get prosecuted in all cases, but that effect is going to be most pronounced with white people. There's a very good test in here that Syeda says that when you hear comments which might sound racist, then just replace the name of the person who you think, or the group of people you think has been racist against, with somebody else's name, So when they chant death to the IDF, should that be offensive? Should everybody have to condemn them like they're being asked to on TV? What if it was replaced with death to the Russian military? What biases does that expose? Big players in this whole racist, anti-Muslim, anti-Islam thing. Michael Gove, that's obvious to anyone who knows, but Michael Gove's the guy who wrote Celsius 77 based on terrorist attacks. One of the chapters in there was called Trojan Horse, and then there was that big, basically, scam plot where somebody wrote a fake letter to the government about the Trojan Horse, about Muslim schools in Birmingham trying to radicalize everybody. They weren't. They were very good schools, but they were closed down. Schools were ruined, careers were ruined, the education of hundreds, if not thousands of people was ruined. It was shown to be a hoax. It was shown to be a lie. No apologies, no recompense for the people whose careers or educations were ruined? Of course not. They were Pakis. They were Muslim. Yeah? Doesn't matter. Screw them. Cricketers. The best cricketers in English cricketing history, in some cases, or the youngest captains, but they were Pakistanis. So guess what? Their teammates would piss on their prayer mats, piss on them, constant abuse, years of it. They upped and left, right? Wouldn't have happened if they were Pakistani, I'm sure. Wouldn't have happened if all the media wasn't spewing out this racist crap, funded, championed by Zionists, by racists like people we have in government. Where does it come from? Mainly from Zionism, the think tanks that basically are all over our government and everything. Henry Jackson Society, things like that. That's where it comes from. It's quite a sobering read, actually. It's quite upsetting, but if you're upset and you're informed, that's okay, because you can argue, and if you can argue and you can stand up, well, you might get arrested on anti-terror on terrorism charges, but you can do something about it. And has there really? Oh, this is a good one as well. So yeah, inquiries waste of money. They'll ignore and bury the results that they don't want. Another good example of that is the Ford inquiry that Keir Starmer called into the Labour Party because I think we've got an anti-Semitism problem. Yeah, he pretty much is paid and bought for by Zionists as well. But now I think he might actually be waking up to the fact that he's going to get voted out for supporting terrorism and being blatantly in favour of racism. So he started saying bad things against Israel. And everybody's outraged. This means Hitler's going to come back to life. We stop killing Palestinians. So, but yeah, it's it has its roots. It's endemic. It's quite dangerous. There were with with all the misinformation about when there was that Welsh African kid, or a Christian Welsh kid of African descent who murdered those girls in Stockport. The media quickly jumped in. Oh look, I think it was the GB News when someone said, "Oh look, the attacker looks like he might be of Muslim descent." How the hell can you tell? Most people wouldn't be able to tell you accurately what Muslim looks like, because they all think it's anybody who looks like somebody we don't like, a Pakistani or an African. Actually, the world's biggest population and the world's biggest percentage of Muslims is Indonesian. Yeah, morons. But that doesn't fit the racist stereotype. And when did racism ever care about truth or statistics, right? You got to bury Home Secretary bury the fact that most of the child rapists aren't Muslim Pakistanis. Bury it for 7 years, waste of public money. So going back to the Ford report that Starmer commissioned, and it did show they've got a racism problem. Mainly, they're really, really terribly racist towards blacks, and then after that towards browns, and then after that towards anyone who's Muslim. Oh, and occasionally something bad has been said that sounds anti-Semitic. We've got a terrible anti-Semitism problem. Quick, all the people who say no, that wasn't the case, let's take the whip away, especially if they're black, especially if they're browns. It's bullshit, yeah? They call for these inquiries, they make a big noise about it, we pay, and if it doesn't actually back up what they want to say, they lie about it or they hide the results, yeah? So this new public inquiry, what's that going to do? Nothing, Still, most of the sexual offences will be committed by white people, as they always have, according to statistics, and they probably won't tell us the results. So there you go. And anyway, going back to those riots, when all that bullshit was started, and you had Tommy Robinson and those morons and those people who incite hate and violence, and people like Farage spreading all the bullshit, 3 old men, grandfathers, got murdered by basically racist yobs. White racist jobs, walking back from mosque. Imagine your old grandfather, or any old grandfather who has got grandchildren that adore them. It's got a grandfather, right? Walking to church, or walking to the synagogue, or walking to mosque, comes back, thrown to the floor, stamped on the head, kicked to death. Yeah, well, that's okay, because they're Muslim. You didn't really hear about that in the news, did you? Nah, they were Muslim. So it's dangerous as well. It's horribly dangerous. It's all just a big scam. Let me read a bit of the book to you. From the far-right violence that broke out in the summer of 2024 to the hatred directed at Muslims in public life during the Gaza conflict, anti-Muslim racism is dangerously out of control. Fed by a network of media outlets, think tanks, commentators, and even the entertainment industry, Islamophobia not only passes the dinner table test, but is also Britain's bigotry blind spot. For too many, Muslims don't matter. There's stuff about banking scandals in here as well, how you can just happily defund anybody who's Muslim or Pakistani. Particularly if you're both of them, man, that's a double target on your back. Like 12-year-old kids, charities, yeah, we're going to suspend your banking services. The government said it's okay. Tony Blair, people like that. It pretty much started with him. Tony Blair was meant to be a nice guy, wasn't he, back in the 90s? Yeah, supports charities that fund illegal settlements. Loved the Iraq War. It was probably on Netanyahu's WhatsApp group. Friends, fellow fascists. I wonder which court he's going to march into next. Not the one where he's being prosecuted, with like a 10-year-old school kid's drawing of a missile, and which country is 20 seconds from developing nuclear weapons. This is a warhead. If you don't help us murder them all, they'll bomb New York next. So, in this incisive polemic, Britain's first Muslim cabinet minister, Conservative peer, campaigner and podcaster Syeda Warsi uses her dual experience at the centre of British power and in the heart of our Muslim communities to unapologetically challenge the corrosive consensus. As Muslims terrified by the riots seriously consider whether Britain should still be their home, Warsi urges us to change course, to unite and dismantle this toxic bigotry. Peter O'Bourne, I like Peter O'Bourne. This is a historical document that will be studied by future generations. Now, the last book review I said if it's got a Book of the Year award by The Telegraph, it's probably not worth reading. This, I just noticed, has got on the front, fiery, insightful and persuasive by the Daily Telegraph. But that was actually, I read the rest of the review and the rest of it just basically cusses the book. Yeah. The dinner table test. Anything else in here I can read you? It's early morning. My alarm's not gone off yet. So, maybe that's why I'm sounding a little less energetic than usual, and I've been a little less, politically correct. Then who wants to be politically correct when you know what our politicians are up to? God damn. Anyway, this is the book, Muslims Don't Matter by Syeda Warsi. A vitally important book from a vitally important voice. That's by David Olusoga, and it includes a new chapter. That new chapter was about the mass murder factory in Gaza. That gotta go. Very good book. 10 out of 10.